Before we start, can you give me an example of something you believe the Bible to be correct about scientifically?
Absolutely. One of the greatest examples is the order of creation presented in the book of Genesis. The order it presents in terms of creative days matches perfectly with what science has found. In Genesis we have a beginning, light, the creation of an atmosphere, dry land, vegetation, the separation of night and day, the appearance of fish and birds, the appearance of land animals, and finally man. What are the chances a Bronze Age goat herder would know this without inspiration from a divine source?
But that's not what science has found at all. You ask what the chances are of getting the order of creation correct, but there are certain things that have to come before other things. A beginning, for example, can only be in one place in the story, otherwise it isn't a beginning. Also, in the Genesis account it has plants existing before the sun, moon, and stars exist. It has water-dwelling creatures appearing at the same time as flying creature. What paleontologists have discovered is nothing like that at all. Water dwellers came first, then the land animals, and finally the birds.
Well, the Bible doesn't mean that God created the sun and the moon on the fourth day. You must realize that Genesis is written from the standpoint of an observer on the earth. What really happened is that God made those celestial bodies visible from the perspective of an observer on the earth.
Again, what evidence do you have to back up your claim? Genesis chapter 1 verse 16 clearly states that God made the celestial lights on the fourth day. It doesn't say he made them visible to an observer on earth. Nowhere in the account does it say it is from the perspective of an observer on the earth. Theologists just made that up, because otherwise the story wouldn't make sense. This is why I find people who believe the Bible to be the literal truth so fascinating. When you encounter something that doesn't make sense, you say, well, the author didn't mean what he wrote, and start redefining words and phrases until it does.
Well, you should know, Frank, that Jehovah's Witnesses do not take the entire Bible literally.
That's good to know. So how do you decide which parts to take literally, and which parts to take figuratively?
Well, when we come across a verse, we analyze it. If the literal interpretation fits with the overall theme of the Bible, then it must be taken literally. If the literal meaning contradicts the Bible, then it must be taken figuratively.
Calvin, what you've just done is set up a circular argument. You believe the Bible is the Word of God, and when analyzing those verses which have a literal meaning that might challenge that view, you interpret them as figurative, because you believe the Bible is the Word of God. You're using your own premise to cloud your analysis. Let me ask you a question, Calvin. What would you need to see in the Bible to prove to you that it isn't the Word of God?
That's a good question. I'd have to say if the Bible made a prophecy that didn't come true, then I would be forced to come to the conclusion that it wasn't from God.
Okay, what about Jeremiah's prophecy in chapter 25? He says, and it shall come to pass, when 70 years are accomplished, that I will punish the king of Babylon, and that nation, saith the Lord, for their iniquity, and the land of the Chaldeans, and will make it perpetual desolations. The land of the Chaldeans is present-day Iraq. I'm sure you're well aware that it is presently occupied, and although has recently been touched by war, it has never been completely desolated. That land has been continuously inhabited to this day.
Well,
In Jeremiah 34 verse 5, God tells Zedekiah that he will die in peace, but in chapter 52 verse 11, he dies a violent death at the hands of the Babylonian king. In 2 Kings 22 verse 20, God tells King Josiah that he will die in peace, but Josiah is slain by the Egyptian pharaoh Necho in battle in chapter 23. Many prophecies in the Bible fail, even when the fulfillment is in the same book.
Well, Frank, I think I'll have to look into that. We actually have a traveling overseer stopping by next week. He has many more years of experience in the truth than I do, and I'm sure he's come across these questions before. Would you be willing to have a discussion with him?
Sure. Shall I come same time next week?
Actually, he'll be here on Wednesday since we change our schedule when he visits, so if that works for you, we'll see you then.
Okay. I can't wait.